Our guest speaker, Nilda Valmores, has been serving for the past year as senior officer for the Sierra Health Foundation, addressing anti-hate and behavioral health problems. Prior to that, Nilda led My Sister's House, the Central Valley's only nonprofit providing shelter and services to the victims of domestic violence, sexual assault, and human trafficking. Nilda will address the state of human trafficking issues and how one can make a difference. In Sacramento alone, approximately 13,079 people were trafficked in our city from 2015 to 2020. She will address the state of human trafficking in Sacramento and how one can make a difference. Please join me in welcoming Nilda Valmores.
Thank you so much. It's so exciting to be here. And thank you for being here on a beautiful afternoon. I'm very honored by your presence, and I'm looking forward to the hour that we're spending time together. So this is a great shot that we're at. You heard a little bit about me, but I wanted to share with you, those are my dogs and my husband, my partner of 36 years, and our dogs. Ruggs is on the left. No, this is... I got to get this right. Ruggs is on the left is right, and Hugs is this one. And they won second place last weekend at the Golden Palooza, which is a convention of 500 golden retrievers in Reading. And almost 2 years ago, this little guy entered our life. His name is Theo. This is his Halloween outfit that I bought, of course. Somehow my daughter had a child and I got the dog. I got the four-legged baby. She got the two-legged baby. And she has since then had another child. So that's a little personal about me. And I wanted to, oops, I'm echoing. Sorry. It's okay. I wanted to find out a little bit about you all. How many of you watch Sound of Freedom? Just one? Oh, just okay. I really want to encourage you. That's the movie for those of you who haven't watched it, that's the movie, the blockbuster, I guess is what they call it, of the summer. It's on human trafficking, which is why I'm mentioning it. It was produced I think 5 years ago is what the credits said, or what they say in the movie, but it was held for various reasons. And I don't know if it's still playing. I think it still is because it was a blockbuster. But if you can see it, we really want to encourage you. It is a heavy subject, obviously, that we're here today on, but it wasn't like people ask me, are you going to be so depressed when you leave that you need a drink or something? And I didn't find that to be the case. I will say that I went with friends who are not of faith, and they found the references of God a little bit offensive to them. But other than that, I thought it was a really good movie. I don't know if anybody who watched it want to make any comments really loudly. I know we're in a big room. Very powerful. Real story, based on a true story. Yeah, it was based on a true story, and it is really powerful. Are there any other comments? So the only thing that I want to add about the true story part of it is that here's this, they obviously have a good looking actor and actress play, some key roles in it. And I thought, how could they be good? So, surely they weren't that good looking in real life. And then later on you see them in the movie and they are that good looking. And you're like, how could that be? But that's a little aside. I'm going to comment some more about the movie in a bit. Okay. As soon as I figure out how to move the slides. Sorry. Okay, so how do I move the slides? Sorry. Why am I not working? There we go. A little clicker. Thank you. Okay, so before I go in, I also meant to ask three people, whoever would like to, if there was a particular thought you had for the hour that we're together that you wanted to have answered or you wanted to raise. Any thoughts, any questions that you wanted that you were thinking about? Mm-hmm.
Is it getting better or is it getting worse?
Is it getting better? Is it getting worse? Good question. Any other thoughts? What are we doing about it? Great.
How do we count?
How do we count? How do we count in terms of Sacramento?
Yes.
Okay.
Is trafficking a misdemeanor here in California, or is it something stronger?
Okay, good. So good that I think I have those questions, some of those questions, most of them, I think, answered to some degree or another. Just to start off with, I thought, actually, I had a previous pretty slide that I want to take credit for, so I'm going to go back to it if I can figure out how to do this. We're going to have fun. There we go. So I thought today, like 10 human trafficking points that I wanted to make with you all that you walk away with. The first is that there are two types of trafficking you probably know, between labor and sex trafficking. Any idea which is more? Sorry? Sex trafficking. So obviously that's the dominant guess. Actually, worldwide, they say, and of course it always depends what stats you use. So let me say that first for most of all the stats that I'm giving you, right? They say that actually labor trafficking is more dominant in the world, but in developing countries like the US, sex trafficking is more dominant. And just a reminder that it's of all ages. I came here in part because I used to work with my sister's house, and we did the work in human trafficking, right? They still do. And we had a client that was like 60 plus years old. Okay. And I've listened to other speakers on human trafficking, other organizations, and they've had babies basically, like a little older than my grandson, that have been trafficked. So it's all ages. It is all genders. Okay. The other thing that I think is important to note is that, especially with sex trafficking, there's a huge overlap with domestic violence. This is part of the reason that my sister's house got into the work that it did. For those of you unfamiliar with my sister's house, we're a local, or they are a local domestic violence. They're a local nonprofit that started off addressing more than 20 years ago the issue of domestic violence, with its target audience being Asian Pacific Islander women and children, because unfortunately, there was some high-profile deaths that had occurred in Sacramento involving Asian community members. So there was questions as to, well, how come they're not getting help? How do we make sure that they get help? How do we stop the problem of domestic violence in the community, right? And so that's why my sister's house was started. I joined a few years after it started, and I remember very vividly a client telling me, look, on the computer screen, she was on the internet, and she said her husband was already looking for victims from other Asian countries. Okay, so he had a pattern. So it was the pattern, you know, that he was going to find another wife, as he had found other wives before her, to abuse and to sexually abuse. Okay, and so that's what made that human trafficking, that version of human trafficking, right? And I remember having another client who came, and by the way, that first one's client, the partner had a job in law enforcement. Okay, this other client was her husband brought her over here from another country, another Asian country, and made her have sex with different men. That's what made her a victim of human trafficking, along with being a victim of domestic violence, right? So domestic violence and human trafficking, they don't always go hand in hand, but sometimes, especially with, I think, marriages that happened or that involve someone originally from another country, that there's a great intersection with human trafficking, okay? So for me, what's really clear, and I know it sounds so obvious, but I just feel like we just don't talk about it enough. And I'm so grateful to see all the gentlemen here today, right? Because we need men to be the biggest advocates, the loudest allies, right? Because unfortunately, human trafficking is really about gender violence. It's not totally about violence against women, but it is largely about violence against women. The more than 70% of victims of human trafficking are women. Okay, when you think about the massage parlor incident that happened in Atlanta a few years ago, okay, he didn't pick out men to shoot. He picked out women, and he picked out Asian women, right? It's about violence. You don't have to commit the sexual act, but it's definitely about sexual violence, right? And again, I want to give credit that unfortunately, men are abused too. And the other thing is women are abusers also. Women are sometimes the people involved and as the middle person or helping create the industry of human trafficking. So we have to unfortunately give credit where credit is due, right? So it involves all genders as both victims and abusers. This stat's a little bit higher than the one I quoted you. And I think what we often don't talk about is that sex trafficking is a race issue, okay? Or it involves many components of race, right? So people often will talk about like, okay, what do the victims of sex trafficking look like? Well, it depends where you're looking, right? So if you're looking on the streets of Stockton Boulevard, what kind of victims are you going to find? Sorry? Black. They're Black women largely, right? If you're looking at cantinas, what kind of women are you going to find? It's Hispanic, right? If you're looking at, we'll just go with massage parlors. What kind of women are you going to find? Asian. Okay. So, and so where you look, or, are you looking for, so oftentimes like as a service provider, it's like, are you looking for foreign victims? Or are you looking for American-born victims, right? And if you're domestic victims, because that will tell you, again, part of the race issue, right? Different races and different types of trafficking, right? And because you have different types of trafficking, that means your responses have to be different, right? Part of the reason My Sister's House, for example, was created, right? Because what do we have to worry about when we're serving victims of human trafficking? Largely, I mean, not always, but largely our victims of human trafficking are Asians. What do you think we have to worry about? What do you think we have to have? We have to have language capacity, right? At the very least, right? If I was serving a Black victim, a Caucasian victim of human trafficking, and because again, human trafficking affects all races, all ethnicities, right? Do I have to worry about language? No. Okay. If not only do I have to worry about language, what else do I have to worry about? Culture, right? How do I speak with them? How do I communicate with them? How do they feel about going into one of the reasons My Sister's House has small bed shelters as opposed to a big institution was that there was a feeling that for many folks, that people that especially the women who came from Asian countries where government isn't a friend. People may think that in the US, but it might even be worse for people from other countries, right? So that, having a big institution, even if it's a big nonprofit, might not feel as friendly as a homey type of environment. And so that's why my sisters has to set up the way it is to deal with victims of domestic violence and human trafficking, to offer that different type of service to be more effective. Because one of the things that we know about service providing, right? And this is just for all of us, if we're getting our car fixed or if we're getting our hair done, what do we know? We know that we go to the place where we feel most what? Most comfortable, right? And so, you have to set up services that relate to the people so that because if they don't stay, lives aren't being changed. And it takes time to change lives. Right? So I want to acknowledge, because figured that this group probably has a lot of economists in the room. It's a supply and demand issue, right? This is part of the complexity of the issue, right? It's not just about the victims. You could also argue that it's about the consumers, right? And whether that consumer starts with pornography. I don't know if you've been watching, I'm sure you've been watching the news and read the recent profile of the principal in was it Placer or Placerville? Pioneer. Okay. Yeah. Looking at pornography, and who knows if there was further involvement with kids in terms of being trafficked, right? But that certainly is one of the steps. And oftentimes in the trafficking world, people talk about grooming, right? So this is what happens with the victims. They start off like, just being friends. It's not even a stranger danger issue, right? It's that people become friends first, whether they meet them in the mall or they meet them on the internet. And then that relationship continues and grows. And then that's when the abuse occurs, right? And as I've said before, that middle person can also be, can be both a friend and a foe, right? At times, that middle person will be a friend to the victim. Maybe that person will be a translator. Maybe that person will help navigate receiving health services. And at the same time, that middle person will make sure that they're there in for the business, being able to do future jobs, for lack of a better term. Okay. And so I think that's also one of the, like, we would often talk about at my sister's house, like when providing trainings, like you can't just assume that that person that's the translator is a good person. That middle person could be part of the abuse, part of the problem. And sometimes that middle person may have been in the same shoes. And this is how they're coping and how they are surviving, right? So because of all that, it goes without saying that it's so complex. I wish there was simple problems, right? We often think about the homeless, and however you feel about the homeless, there's a high degree of folks that have trafficked or been trafficked and are homeless, right? The same with folks that have mental health issues. I'm not sure which comes first. Is it the mental health issues or is it the trafficking experience? Right. But either way, there's often a connection. Same with foster youth. Often a lot of foster youth, high stats of the number of foster youth that are being trafficked, number of runaways that are trafficked, and then connecting to substance abuse too. Right. So how does this all deal? Like, I've had medical professionals, I've heard medical professionals talk about, like, that they had someone come in their door in the emergency room, right? And they may even be a frequent flyer of receiving services, right? And it takes a while for folks to realize, oh, that's not just a homeless woman, right? That's a homeless woman who's been trafficked, right? So that they diagnose as a homeless woman, or they diagnose as a woman who has substance abuse issues, but it takes a while for them to recognize that there was more going on there, that this woman perhaps was drugged and then became addicted, and therefore had the substance abuse problem. Yeah. So, and unfortunately, I think some of the complexity is it's not just a US problem, it's a global problem. Okay. And where do you think most of the human trafficking victims come from? What area of the world? You don't, no idea? Yeah, they do come from everywhere. There are a lot in the US that are naturally born here. I mean, especially, I brought Ukraine up there in the Middle East because of wartime. It's what my always like angst about war is. I often think about, and including the immigration issues, the immigration flow from South America. For me, that's a different type of war, right? Or some of them are escaping war. Or I think about like how many of those women get trafficked along the way. Because right, that's happening. How many of those women are sexually violated? How many of those women are abused? And not just women, I should say children. And again, I'm sure it happens to men too, or young men. I want to acknowledge that. But most of the times, what the stats say is that it's women. Okay. So most of the folks, according to stats I've read, again, are from Asia. And why does that make sense that most of the traffic victims might come from Asia, even though we don't think about that in the US? It's, yeah, where in the world is there the most people? Asia, right? So it makes just numeric sense that most of the clients, that most of the traffic victims come from Asia. But, and not just the fact that there are most folks coming from Asia, or most of the population is intense in Asia. What might be another reason? Poverty. Yes, exactly. Right. I mean, it's a push factor, right? It's a reason why sometimes women leave countries thinking of that great dream that we all have of having a great life, right? And so sometimes they leave, countries thinking that there's love on the other side across the ocean, right? Or that there's going to be love with that person wherever, even if that person's just in that country, right? And so that's when human trafficking is likely to occur, right? So, I did send a note. This is a great video. Are you be able to watch that real quick? This, yeah, sorry. This is like one of the best videos that I have seen. It does take. While she's figuring it out, I'm going to go to the next thing. Well, I'm going to let her figure it out. Thank you for figuring it out. So this is like one of my biggest peeves right now. This is an older paper because I knew I was going to be speaking to you all. YouTube is not a link. Copy and paste it. Yeah, in the middle of Zoom, you can't repeat that. It shows in the platform. We could stop my presentation and we'll come back to it. Can we copy and paste it?
No, because we're in Zoom. We're in the middle of Zoom, so you can't.
Oh, okay. Okay, so all the folks in Zoom land, please do watch this video. This is a great video. So I'll tell you about it. It's from that's about human trafficking, looking at the hotel side. Maybe at the end, if we have time, we can try to look at it. And it's about what hotels are doing in terms of human trafficking, right? Trying to address the issue. One of the quotes there is that, hotel people know where the staff know that they've got human trafficking going on. And, just to tell you again that it is in our backyard, right? We've had many stories, many incidents of hotels nearby in Sacramento County that, people have been arrested because of trafficking that has occurred, and probably more should have been arrested, right? So it is unfortunately in our backyard, right? And it also goes through like the signs of human trafficking. And hopefully anybody knows some of the signs of human trafficking? Sorry, somebody knows. No. She's gonna try.
There's always somebody with that person, they're never alone.
Yes, they're never alone. They might be fearful, right? What else might be signs? Yes, and that big age difference. If that couple looks weird to you, I mean, that my angst goes up. When and sometimes it is love, but many times it is not, right?
Some tattooing, like daddy's girl
Yeah, there is branding that can occur with tattoos, right? What are some other signs? Looking drugged, right? Because maybe they have been drugged, right? Not having money, right? Not having documentation, especially if they're from another country, right? What else? Physical abuse, right? If they're scared, if they move around a lot, right? If there's a story, or if you see a house and you don't see, it might be a lot of people going in, or maybe you see that woman or women in there in that house and people never come out, right? Or you see a lot of extra security, but you live in a place which shouldn't have needs for a lot of security, right? Those are questions, right? So this video talks about like hotels are part of the problem, and you hear about like the Super Bowl issue, right? The convention, the tourism, how that can add to the problem, right? And thankfully, and I didn't know about it, that there were some lawsuits that have come about that people have done against the hotels. And I know that actually, because I know my sister's house benefited locally, because some of the motels that were closed down in the area, they had to give some, as part of the lawsuit settlement, they had to give some money to the district attorney's office, who then divided it up to some of the local nonprofits in terms of dealing with the human trafficking. What else does I'm not good at names, sorry, but it's about I think if you look up human trafficking in hotels, motels, I think you'll find it. And I can forward this to Michelle. Yeah, I mean, I think that that's a really good question. You've probably saw or heard of the story about the airline incidents who focused on a Black child, I think. Yeah. And so I think you have to be, and I think that one of the things you have to really be really observant, and you can't just jump to the conclusion, right, that this is a traffic case, even though, especially when you do the work, that's where you automatically go right away, right? But you have to be cautious and see, like, okay, what does the relationship look like between the adult and the child? And see if there's any inappropriateness that might be going on. And probably even, I think, especially with teenagers, that you can begin to ask the questions of them, but you have to take them aside. You can't do it in front of the other adult, right? And so sometimes that's where it's helpful to do things in partnership to be careful, right? And also the other thing and that you have to be careful about is that sometimes people aren't ready to get the help. That doesn't mean that they don't want the help. That means they don't have the courage yet to get the help, is what it means, right? So that they're afraid that by saying something, they're going to still end up in that situation. Now you've just added a beating to their name, right? And so of course they're going to be scared and petrified. And you have to also remember too, right? Like people don't even like, I used to, when we did the trainings for, on domestic violence and human trafficking, do you have to be physically hit to be abused? No, because what can you do? What can somebody who wants to hurt somebody do without touching them? Mental abuse is a big thing. It's usually the first start of abusing. What else can they do? Or how is that mental abuse? How can that mental abuse be displayed? Yeah. Yeah. So think about, and this is a true story. I remember a client talking about like that they were never physically threatened by their partner, but they got a call from someone in their homeland who was saying that their family member in their homeland was going to be hurt if they ran away, if they did something. So they were never touched. They were never threatened. But were they scared as hell that something was going to happen? And did they feel tied to the situation? Most definitely. Right. And the verbal and the mental abuse, it always starts there. Right. It always starts with and the game playing, right? Like, oh, you're beautiful, you're wonderful today, and tomorrow you're ugly as heck. And you can't do anything and don't know anything, right? I mean, that's the comments. And even stuff like remember someone saying like, I was told I couldn't eat a banana even though I was starving and I had money in my pocket. She couldn't buy a banana. And I'm thinking like, oh my gosh. And she was told that she couldn't buy a banana because that wasn't the American thing to do, that Asians had to eat noodles. So that's, so weird stuff. And you think it's, it's not going to happen here, but it does. Right. And kind of glossed over that first step of the, domestic servitude is not just that I gave you the examples of the husbands, right? Sometimes women will come in, and it could have been a man too, but in this case, it was a woman that I'm thinking of in terms of the story. Like they'll rescue a client, like, here, let me get you out of that bad situation, right? And then they end up exploiting that same person, right? And so those are things that we have to double check, and we have to check ourselves on, like, are we really helping the person or are we exploiting them? And at the end, like, it's a power issue, right? If you're exploiting somebody, you might be saving money on your housework. But it's a power issue. It's a money issue. It's a greed issue. Right? Similarly, let's see if this is the next slide. It's not. Let me jump to it and I'll go back. Yeah, there it is. So I told you my biggest peeve, and I brought this newspaper out. So international law basically is you have a child under 18. It's basically a human trafficking situation. So that's international kind of accepted. If that child is being sexually abused, it's probably human trafficking, especially if it involves like transferring the child around, other explosive partners, etc. Right? There's a way out of that many in our own state of California, a wonderful state, do. And that's called marriage. Now, I'm a big believer in marriage, but I'm not a big believer in marriages under 18 years old. This is there was, I don't know if you saw the news articles that were occurring just till when the governor recently signed But there are, and I'm sure that there'll be, how legislation gets redone kind of bit. I'm sure that that will occur, right? Of and I still don't think they got it to where it's the fullest of that marriage under 18 should not be allowed, right? So there's a law basically that was signed trying to end human trafficking under 18 via marriages, but I don't think it was complete because there were people that were afraid that it was violating rights. So that's how I feel. Yeah. I think violating, I mean, they would say that it was violating even the young women's rights. That when young women are old enough to make decisions. But in some cases, I think, especially with a lot of, not for all countries, but many countries, you're told who you get to marry, right? And you don't have a choice, or you really are embarrassing your family. You're letting them down, right? And sometimes it's also an economic decision for that family, right? There's might be passing of money, or it might be just the fact that, you're going into another household. And so there's some money that's attached with it, so kind of a dowry that might pass on, or the fact that there might be access to more money, right? So so young women get trafficked this way because they're, purposely marketed and sold, and many times brought to the U.S. into our wonderful state and creating not the women are creating the problems, but there's a problem that exists in our neighborhoods because of this. So I think there's still a lot of work that needs to be fixed in this arena, which is why I bring it up. So
who married who, how did they get together, if it were here, our culture, not over.
So it is, so you have some of, like, you see some of it more, like you hear the stories more about like happening in Utah, right? Where partly because of religion, right? And that an older man marries a younger woman, a younger child. It's a child bride, basically, right? So that would be like the most domestic example that I could give you, right? Or think about it that like again, and it doesn't have to be like a 50-year-old man or a 40-year-old man. It could be even a 25-year-old man marrying a 16-year-old girl, where that age gap may not be so big, but still, right? Does she really know what's happening to her? Right. And does she have the power to leave is the other question. Right. And the other example, again, is like that people may have, this has happened where they've lived in the US a long time. They may even have been born in the US, but their parents were born in another country for whatever reasons. They couldn't find a partner here in the US, or maybe that they did find a partner. And again, there's an age gap, and they've married for cultural reasons because the family expected them to get married. So. And I had them under the how to respond category. Oops. Oh, I guess there's somebody asking a question. Is that what that is? Okay. Hit the X. Sorry. Oh, she's going to get the question. Thank you. So we did talk about observing the situation and the details in terms of how to respond to a case, call for help and report, and then of course, always be safe, right? I personally, people will often tell you like there's a national crisis line. I personally believe in the power of going local. I really believe it's important to call like local police and have them record that this incident has occurred. Sorry, were you going to ask a question? Oh, okay. The one thing I want to say, like, is that I feel like as human beings, like we have to prepare ourselves, right? So I live with a wonderful man. I've lived with him for 36 years, thankfully legally. But my wonderful husband, I'm sure it's in his genes, which is why I'm giving you this story. And he will tell you it's okay for me to tell on him. So I'm telling on him, right? He'll tell you like, Nilda, it's best to walk away. Let's just go now. Like, we don't have to do this. We don't have to be involved, right? And I feel very strongly like we all have to prepare ourselves for that time when you see a couple, where the woman's on the street curb in front of a restaurant crying and the guy is yelling at her. This happened to me in Leatherby's, of all places, right? And you have to think about how are you going to respond, right? And what's the best way to respond, and it could have been a domestic violence case. It could have been a human trafficking case. It could have been both. You don't know, right? But you do know your stomach goes up, right? The butterflies go up, that there's something wrong that's happening here. And the situation could escalate, right? And you, I think, have a responsibility. I think we all have a responsibility to figure out how can we best respond. So in my husband's case, his best response is bringing me along, so that I deal with the issue, right? Because he's like, okay, we got to be out of here. Like, we got to go, so, but, so again, that's kind of my lighthearted way of saying, that really like think about the details. I've been known to take pictures of cars and to, talk to the police, even if they have noting that like, oh, this is a potential problem area where somebody tends to gather, where situations tend to occur. I think that's important for them to know. Right. So what I did do, yeah, so I literally went up to the woman and said like, hey, is everything okay? And then I also went into the restaurant and I said, I think you might have a problem outside. Can we call? Or they said they had called police already. And I hovered in the car nearby until, until we were forced to leave by the husband, and just to stay, and also so that for that person to know that people were watching, right? That's important. In that case, the husband did pull me away, so I don't have a response for that. But I would imagine that the police would have. And actually, though, often what happens more is the time to be truthful is that couple is probably going to walk away, right? But I will tell you, having worked with survivors, right, the fact that somebody helped a little bit, right, that's a huge help, right? And that's what you're doing. You're trying to give them some hope that, and that there are people out there who care, and that when this other person is saying nobody is going to care about you, that it's not true, that there are people that care. I do. Yeah. I think it has to do with like 3 fingers, I think, but I may be wrong. I haven't used it in a while. Yeah. I haven't seen it done, but I have seen videos about it. So, and I think it's not a movement that has caught on yet, that people, so that's part of the reason that we all don't know about it. Does anybody know about it here? There's like a sign, so that like a hand sign, so that that like can ask for help. Oh, I haven't heard about it behind the back, but now I'm going to look. Yeah. Like if you can walk with a person to the women's bathroom, I mean, whatever you can do in terms of creating a diversion, to be able to have some space to ask like, hey, are you okay? Do you need help? Right. That's the bottom line. And then to know, okay, if she says yes, what are you going to do? Like, and so she says, yes, you want to, especially if you know of a local organization that can help, if you can get her out of the situation. And of course, first and foremost, everyone will tell you, we want to make sure that you're safe too. Right. So we want you to do this, not in an obvious way. We don't want you flagging and saying, oh, I'm going to help her. Like, we want you to do this in a quiet way, as quickly as possible, so that she can get out there and get the help that she needs.
There's been a lot of commercials like that. I've noticed that too. I don't know what the signal is, but I do notice that on some of these commercials, it's as simple as the victim dropping a note behind your back, like if she's really in trouble. If there's a way to let potential victims know, carry something in your pocket that if you're in a situation, you can drop it on the ground, but then we all need to be alert to having something like that happen. And if that's the case, I'm assuming the first thing would be to take your cell phone and call police and describe the situation. Maybe even taking a picture.
Yeah. And if you can help the woman move to a place of safety where the other guy doesn't see her, that the other person doesn't see her, that's really important. Did we figure out the question for the Zoom land? Oh, okay. All right. So I'm almost at the end, and I know we've talked a lot about foreign situations or situations of women from abroad. If there's one thing I want you to do afterwards is I want you to talk to that young family member that might be spending a lot of time in the mall, might be spending a lot of time on the internet, and it could be a friend, maybe it's not a biological family member, right? And to have that discussion about trafficking and how big a problem is and the whole state of grooming, right? Because you want to make sure that you let them know that this is not okay, that there are people who want to help too. And then we want to encourage you to support good legislation, to support organizations that are doing the work. And it's the little things. Do you know when Human Trafficking Month is? Awareness Month is? It's January, Human Trafficking Awareness Day. It's my husband's birthday, January 11. And the color of human trafficking awareness, it's teal. So that's have your conversation with your family. Oh, and then I think this is the end, because I figured you're a bunch of readers here. This is a great book. Maggie Krell used to work for the local DA and works for the Attorney General's office. It reads like a movie. I can't wait for it to become a movie. Polaris is a place where I go for a lot of stats. So really want to encourage you to visit their website, and they do a lot of good work, national work on human trafficking.
Okay, what is the world's largest sex trafficking?
What is fighting the world's largest sex trafficking? Do you know what that is? Actually, Backpage. So it was the internet service provider, right? Because that's a way to get victims, right? Match victims up with and get abusers to get their commodity with little attention.
Thank you so much, Nilda. I want to take the microphone. Wonderful presentation. We have time for questions. Does anybody have a question that they want to?
Why do you think it's so prevalent in the Sacramento area, this issue?
Great question.
So it's prevalent for a lot of different reasons, right? One, I think first and foremost, I think the geography of Sacramento, right? The accessibility for the freeways going east and west and north and south. I think that's a big reason for human trafficking. By the way, as a little aside, we had done a study once when we were just starting getting into human trafficking, and looked at where there were, I don't know if you remember the Sacramento News and Review, and before, like, God, 10, 15 years ago, you'd look on the back pages of the News and Review, and what would you see? Bunch of sex ads, basically, right? So I had interns plot, where were all these places to get service from? And where were they? They were along the highway. Along the highway, actually more towards Citrus Heights than South Sacramento, even though that these were lots of ads with Asian pictures, right? So I think that the highway accessibility is a big factor. And part of that too is that the wealth, both in Las Vegas, Reno, Lake Tahoe, and San Francisco, right? Because again, it's a crime that involves money transfer along with the body usage, and so I think that that's a reason for the high state of human trafficking, right? And I think also the diversity of our country means that we can hide the problem a little in our area, unfortunately.
There's one question from the people on chat. Sharon has asked, can you speak more about the specific connection of Sacramento to human trafficking?
Yeah, and so actually, I think that the gentleman's question was kind of that of why is there such a problem of human trafficking in Sacramento? I think again because of the geography, and in addition to the freeways, right? It's the fact that we're in California. Right. So there's the whole, we're in California. So we've got both the Asian part and we've got, Central South America part, Mexico. Right. And so there's all those add up together to a perfect, reason for trafficking to occur in Sacramento. And then some would also argue the tourism, the conferences that we have, right, that those are vehicles unfortunately for encouraging human trafficking, right? Sorry. This is for the Zoom audience, I think. If you say the question, I'll re-say it. Are the perpetrators brought to justice? There's different levels of perpetrators, like Maggie Krau's book on about Backpage was about all the was not about the actual Johns, so to speak, right? But it's actually about the industry, creating the dynamics to make trafficking easy, and so it took a long time in that book, and I think that there's probably still a question of whether or not that they've really done their time in terms of bringing folks to justice. So, I don't know. I mean, I feel like trafficking continues, so I don't think that they're brought to justice. And personally, that's why I'm more of a victim advocate, because I feel like that we can be more effective helping the victims than we can be concentrating on the criminals. But I definitely think there's need to do both. I'm not good at the criminal side just because I just don't have the patience with it. Like, you can see the change when a victim wants to change their lives. You can see that, and you can feel the gratitude, and you want them to succeed, right? And the thing about people that are abusers is that they're always the victim. That's what they will say, that they're, everyone else is doing something wrong. They're not the ones doing anything wrong. And so you've got that problem to deal with too.
Yeah, I have another question from, it's one at the bottom there, Teresa. We have so many massage parlors. Are they ever checked?
Oh my God, they are not checked enough, in my opinion. I mean, think about it. Like the police department, if you go to the police department on Freeport, off of Freeport, the administrative headquarters, not that far, within a mile, are several sketchy massage parlors there. and I've actually knocked on those doors. So I know that I'm pretty confident that they're sketchy massage parlors. I want to say that there are Asian massage parlors that you can feel comfortable going into it as a woman, or as sending my husband or my son there. You can feel comfortable that you're getting a real massage. But then there are other massage parlors that you go, I don't want, my family member going there. Okay. And those not that far from the police departments. So I feel like our massage parlors being checked? My answer is a definite no. And I wonder, sorry to our law enforcement, why is this allowed? This is a problem within a mile from you. Why is this allowed? And part of it too is not, again, just the owners. It's also the building owners, right? Like, why are the building owners allowing, these businesses, these establishments there? And unfortunately, I do think it goes back to money and greed. Sorry.
What's the difference between prostitution and trafficking?
That's a great question. Thank you for asking that. There are people who believe that it is okay to give sex and they're not causing any harm. So that a partner or a person can ask for sex and pay for sex, and that's prostitution, right? The problem is when prostitution has that piece of it, that element of it, where that woman is saying, yes, I will give you sex because I've been drugged, or because I don't feel like I have any other option or thing to do. I don't know where to go for help, or because you've beat me up. So yeah, I'm going to give sex to somebody else. I'm going to walk the streets and offer my body to whoever wants to say to pay for it. So that's the difference in my mind. There are what they call sex workers, and they are an industry. They do lobby. They lobby well in Sacramento, and they feel like it's okay to have sex as a business, right? And it's also the lines, and this is the section, the part of like the freedom of rights and so forth, like that people will argue that pornography is okay, right? My question is does pornography, does it lead to other things that are not acceptable, right? And if that case, then in my mind, if it does lead to often a lot of things that are not acceptable, then perhaps pornography should not be acceptable either.
Thank you, Nilda.